Today we're going to talk about controlling color in film production. We have with us cinematographer Greig Fraser and makeup artist Donald Mowat. Concern about color has always been there. Roger, why don't you tell us about the Technicolor days?
Well, I just read, or I just understood that when they used to shoot on Technicolor, there would be a Technicolor rep on set judging the lighting and whether the lighting was a natural color.
Wow.
Yeah, but I mean...
Those are the days we need back again, don't we?
Yeah, but cinematographers didn't use a lot of colors. They might have used colors in the backgrounds, but even like Jack Cardiff on Black Narcissus or something, it was the backgrounds were colored, but the characters were usually lit with kind of a neutral light, weren't they?
I guess that gels might have been a harder thing, or an evolutionary thing that came later as well. You know, I don't know. I'm sure that sort of gels weren't as precise as they are now. So, you know, the best use for skin tone would have been tungstens, right? Or you know, daylight.
Well, yeah. And as you said to me earlier that in the old days there were tungsten lamps and it was tungsten-based balanced film. So right there, you've got something that's more matched than we have now.
Carbon arcs, and you'd have daylight carbons or tungsten carbons.
Right. And I think the place where it becomes the most concerning is the face tones. Because everything else, okay, that dress might be slightly a different color or something, but once you start to have a problem with face tones, I think that takes you out of the movie because you're trying to create something realistic. Yeah?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the really interesting parts of this conversation, and particularly with Donald as well being here, is that, you know, we're in this era right now where lights have evolved and cameras have evolved so much, but they've evolved very separately and very differently. You know, one of the enjoyable parts that I had when I shoot film, or still do when I shoot film, is that the tungsten film is designed specifically for tungsten light. And tungsten light across the world doesn't really change, does it? It's pretty much the same kind of filament across every fixture. It's kind of the quality of the light as opposed to the color. So you can kind of guarantee good skin tone with film stock that's designed for tungsten. But where I'm struggling at the moment, shooting digital with new LEDs, is finding information about what LEDs do what to different skin tones, you know, and different shades of skin tones. And, you know, and what I find really interesting is also talking to makeup artists about how they feel when you put a light on their subject that they've come out of a trailer, which probably has a totally different light that you're using on set. Right, Donald?
Well, it's been really challenging because depending on the film you're working on, you have great productions that get it and are really respectful of everybody's work process, not just one or two areas, you know, where you actually have LED on the trailer, or a great working relationship with the camera department and a gaffer who actually will come on board representing, you know, Roger or you, Greg, or other DPs, cinematographers I'm working with, and really, like, I'm working with Jeff Cronenworth right now, who really are interested in what we're working with. Other times you're on a trailer, you're lost. You're completely lost. You may as well be working on a music video from the 80s. And the light's impossible, and everybody's an expert, and you've got a transport guy who's, you know, changing fluorescence for you. So it's kind of come a long way. That's great. It's really helpful. Plus the amount of people of color now who are, you know, also weighing in on how they look next to other people, and the managers and the agents. The politics of makeup is changed for me in the last even 10 years, where everybody's involved in it, and it can be potentially very dangerous as well, and a hotbed. So it's great to work with collaborators, people like you, people like Jeff, I mean, I don't know, Seamus McGarvey, different people who are interested in what we face on another level, that because we have to answer to so many people now that we never did. It was like 3 or 4 of us. I could go to you or Greg or Roger and James and say, hey, what do you think? When I go back to a movie like Prisoners, that what you see is what you get kind of thing, I never worried. Now I've got people wearing trailers that don't reflect anything that we're shooting, and I may not have the ear of a cinematographer because it might go through a committee at a studio telling us to warm them up or do, strange notes that we get. So it's really difficult. It's very different than what we used to work with.
And what do you do when you bring out a character and it's a new scene and obviously different lighting, and the character looks different than they used to do? I mean, only because of the lighting is different and it's reacting differently to your makeup.
I guess you have to, I guess doesn't it come back to people catching it or somebody having a quick word with you and saying, Greg, we've done that. A route certain to say, maybe we need to do this. Can we check that or have a look? Is it me? Is it, there are people who look different. I've just experienced something that was really interesting where some people it's a natural kind of organic thing that their skin changes under a kind of stress that they have, that they suffer
on their own internally. It just happens. It's
that's interesting.
Thing. Yeah, and it happened to me last year with a lovely actress who just has an internal thing that happens to her. That she changes, and people notice it and you'll get a call saying, "Is she not well?" And it happens, and you have to deal with that, or color drains from your face or something. I think it's just maybe we don't do enough tests to see what would happen after a long day or something like that. It's just really, it's fascinating. I mean, there's so much to it. I think it's so exciting, and the things that people are doing, when you mentioned the LED, and some of these now trailers have it, like the trailer and now actually have someone spent a lot of money to put some LED lighting, and it's really interesting that you can change on the panel. But the first time I worked with David Fincher was the first director who'd actually ever explained to me he hates magenta. It's he's
I think we all do in Skin. Yeah.
Right? But he told me that, so I knew not to be very careful.
Mm-hmm.
He's very technical, and I was aware of that. And other people don't. They don't know, and they leave it up to other people to explain. It's just sometimes harder with the actors who don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
As
So Donald, before lights became energy efficient and LED or fluorescent, you were using tungsten bulbs effectively in a makeup trailer, weren't you? I mean, again, it goes back to that same. There's no variables. It's tungsten. You make up with tungsten. You probably come onto a tungsten set and shoot with a tungsten film, and one of the things that I'm sort of personally I'm struggling with, and I'm finding it very, very hard to find a balance to get that skin tone, to find good skin tone with enough red in it, because skin does have red in it.
Yeah.
But it just doesn't have magenta, and it's so close on the spectrum.
Yep.
That, as you said, you struggle with magenta, and consistently struggle with bad quality fixtures. But finding that red, that finesse or that minutia of red, to not have skin feel pallid, or like they're too made up, or too controlled. Roger, what was that like for you when you were because you were one of the first people to embrace the Alexa, which effectively was the digital camera, right? That changed kind of everything. How did you guys feel when you were on set shooting, and then James, when you were looking at the footage, either in dailies or how are you viewing that? How is that change happening?
Well,
what did you do to kind of help that?
Well, we do go to a lot of trouble to make sure that, because we're finishing in P3 color space, that we have a P3 monitor that's calibrated. So we're trying to have a monitor that it really shows us what it's going to look like in the end.
But I got to say,
And that's through dailies? Sorry,
No,
that
on
was
set.
through dailies?
On set, I get it calibrated and have them do a monitor that's P3, ability to show P3, because that's our color space.
But I got to say, in terms of skin tone, it was a bit of a relief starting to shoot with Alexa, because it goes back to the DI process. When we were shooting film negative and then scanning it and going through a DI process to go back film out, sometimes it was a nightmare because the skin tones would always skew magenta. So you had to do, we always found, we had to do a select on skin tones in faces to actually, separately time people's faces. And this might happen differently if you had Tommy Lee Jones in a shot with, whoever. I mean, they were very different. So when we started with the Alexa, I mean, there were other issues, but I didn't find skin tone was such a problem because we've been dealing with this film DI transfer for a few years,
I think a lot of that is because you're going digital to digital, so you're not
exactly
changing formats.
You're not having that problem.
And it's funny because there's something, what you were saying about magenta and red being so close, it's very hard to get that magenta out sometimes, and the faces go gray if you go too much. I mean, we've spent hours trying to
select. Yeah.
I was just thinking, now that we're talking about magenta, and I mean, the Fincher thing makes me laugh because it terrified people. There were so many makeup people that they didn't really understand and were afraid to look like they didn't know the answer. And everybody
always a mistake.
What do they call that? Imposter syndrome, and that thing people have. But I remember when people started dropping all the makeups that had any red in it, and they were terrified. It was a moment where, so suddenly you'd be on films where you would just start to see the cast all turn up quite yellow and a bit jaundiced looking. Do you remember that? There was a moment where I can't remember the year, but there was a moment where I just remember seeing even actors who thought they'd read somewhere, where they thought they knew better, or actors who came with all their own people, and suddenly all the pinks and reds because people didn't know the difference, or how do you differentiate, especially then in prosthetics, because that was a whole other thing, because you always needed a bit of red, but magenta and red, like you said, it made me laugh. I was on a job where there were a large cast where suddenly, particularly the men, who you sometimes need a bit of that to look kind of rugged and wholesome. Everybody just looked like they had a touch of, a bit of hepatitis. It was just, everyone looked a bit yellow, and suddenly you were getting notes back from, is he feeling okay? The makeup people were just putting a yellow into everything, and all the bases from the film makeup companies, like Visiora makeup, which they don't make anymore, was made by a French cinematographer. And suddenly they all had these very high yellow and green content in it.
One of the first movies that we worked on, it wasn't the first digital, but none of the production had any experience with digital, and the makeup person made it clear she didn't want to do she didn't want us to shoot digital. And I thought, well, why is the makeup person saying this? And then she kept saying, they're going to turn orange, they're going to turn orange. And she came to our calibrated monitor. I said, listen, come to our calibrated monitor and look at this. Because oftentimes when you're looking at dailies, some of these systems that are you're viewing dailies on are not color correct at all. You can see what the action was, but that's about it. So she would come to the monitor and be really surprised that they looked fine, that it was showing her what they looked like, what she thought they looked like, but she thought she was going to have to run in and change, the orange look, but it was fine.
That's one of the most scary things about this monitoring thing, particularly with digital. And I guess this is where, I know this is not a film v digital debate by any stretch of the imagination. But
let's not do that.
I am definitely no. shot out of a cannon before we do that. But what I would love to talk about in a minute is when you were shooting film and then going to film. You know, like the optical process, because I've only done one film optically, and it was really interesting. And
really, you're so young.
When I started shooting, yeah, I mean, yeah. Don't tell that to my kids. My kids think I'm really old. But I feel like I've done one film optically, which was such an interesting experience. But then everything was sort of DI from there. Like it was shooting film, then DI, and then digital comes in. And so I'm like, I would love to chat about what the process was. If it was more accurate going optical than it was then with the DI, was that DI process a little bit kind of a bit of a dark time in the history, where it shoot film and then go to a DI with substandard scanners, for example? Was optical the kind of the prime time color? I'm not talking about the VFX. I'm talking about for color and for predictability, I guess.
Oh,
I don't know. The first DI we did was so out there that it's kind of hard not to sort of think of that as a standard. I mean,
but also the whole process of timing film versus digital. When you time film and you're adjusting film, you take that color and it's affecting the whole frame. So it's a lot harder because, as you know, because you timed a film, that you don't have the ability to say, I only want this part to change this part.
Yeah, you can't do a select, and then the first DI we did was totally about doing selects, wasn't it? Oh, brother. But I think the thing about, I think the thing about shooting on film and printing on film, the whole process being, a photochemical one, it forced you to shoot what you really wanted, what you needed in the end. Yeah. It forced you to be exact on set.
Now, that's a good point.
I mean...
That's exactly right.
I mean, I always have used a lot of different variation in colors, colored light, including light in the actors with colored light. I mean, I've not been afraid of doing that. And but it was still kind of controlling what color I was using, and you would often have to do tests with the makeup artists and the actors to establish that you were okay going that way, and wardrobe and everybody else, And I don't feel in a digital world you do that so much more. I still shoot
do you think that's
what I want, but I don't think you do as many rigorous tests as you might have done on film.
Do you feel like that's a loss? Do you feel like, because obviously we try and become more efficient, don't we, with pre-production and shooting, but do you think that's a loss?
Well, I do, because I think it's all tied up with the whole crew sitting, well, not the whole crew, but all the HODs sitting watching dailies. I think it's all tied up with that whole collaborative process. And now, there's less of that. I mean, the director's watching a calibrated monitor, so they can say if it's too yellow or red or whatever. And, everybody's got their own opinions. But back then, I don't know. Back then, it felt like you were forced to collaborate more than you are today.
And it also just made me wonder, Donald, have you ever worked with someone that knew they were going to do a lot in post? So how does that affect your work if they're saying, oh, well, actually, you can't see it now, but this scene is going to be all blue or something? Does that affect how you make them up? And have you ever had that situation of knowing that you were putting someone out there in a scene that wasn't going to look like that at all?
I think in the Marvel movies, that. I think we knew it in Dune with the blue eyes. That was hard sometimes with some of the actors who are not always sure, and you have to kind of reiterate or put, like Paul Lambert giving me what the blue eyes would look like. And sometimes if you were doing like a darker skin tone or a kind of grimy or dirty or broken down look, so that they could, because some actors don't visualize things that way. They're concerned, as they should, right, about what they're working on. And people do work in a vacuum cleaner sometimes. But it's just what they're, and that's the beauty of what we all do. And you rely on each other. Well, maybe not so much anymore, but people should, but like, as to what Roger was saying, I completely agree. When we would have dailies in a room where people could rely on the experts would talk about different things. And I just remember on Prisoners when they decided, if you remember when, everybody said, no, we should try this, with Paul Dano and go this far. And Denis and everybody and Roger, we just sat there, but there were maybe 8 or 9 of us. Or I don't feel we do that anymore, or we don't even do tests. And not that it has to be on camera, but that the people who are the experts in their field, in Greg and you, and I mean, James knows more about everything about a movie than anybody I've ever met.
It gets me
so
far.
I can almost call James and say, what do you think of this? Or, so when we were doing Prisoners and trying to figure out putting Viola with other people and kind of the balance of things, I knew I could get a straight answer from someone who knew, or that Roger would, doing Joy Pink, what that was.
Yeah.
We're not doing that anymore. Everybody's an expert from other departments, seemingly. I think from not testing, from not being as collaborative, and people going off on their phones and watching pics, and what's the other one? Pics and different programs that they all come back. And if I didn't have Greg to work with and say, to explain to somebody, no, we're going darker because your eyes will be blue, you won't. This is very difficult to not have the backup and support of people who really know what they're doing.
But then there's also
an actor, right?
Then there's also, what are they watching dailies on? Are they watching Rec 709 or P3?
They're usually
and what
Rec
they watching it
709.
on? And so it's not going to be what the final image is. The whole thing is, that was the thing. I'm not being nostalgic, but going back to film, when you watch dailies,
you were seeing
you
it.
shot that. That's what you wanted. You couldn't do much in the lab. You could change overall, as James said, RGB, and you can change density, but you couldn't change contrast. Unless you did a special processing, you couldn't select, a green and knock it down, or the red of a face. You just couldn't do it. You had to make sure that was there in the camera.
It's also not just what they're watching it on; it's where they're watching it.
Well,
yes.
I've had experiences like, again, not to be negative, but I've had experiences where I've got calls about things being too dark, and I'm asking where are people watching these things?
Yes.
They're on their phone in the back of a car in Burbank on the way to the office.
Well, I tell you, a famous story I always tell was like I was doing Mountains of the Moon with Bob Rafelson in the middle of Kenya, right? Say Lake Turkana or something, and I think it was Melnick came and said, the studio want to talk to you. I mean, studio, what do you want to talk to me for? I get on the phone. The guy says, it's too yellow. That scene you shot in Malindi, it's too yellow. I said, too yellow? It didn't look too yellow to me. I said, where are you watching it? He said, I'm watching it in the back of my car. I'm on the PCH. He was watching a whatever it was. VHS cassette in the back of his car on the way to the studio on the PCH.
So even back then, daily viewing wasn't...
the whole...
Yeah.
But even still, like that's hilarious, as opposed to going to the lab and watching it blow up. Or,
I watched it to print, absolutely. There is only one way of seeing it,
I have a horror story similar to that, but maybe not as funny.
It wasn't funny at the time. I thought I was going to get fired again.
No, I'm glad you can laugh about it now. But I was doing Bright Star in London, and the dailies were coming back very bright, and this is on film, so I was metering, and my meter was I changed my meter, and I tried a few different things. I backed up my meter with my gaffer and the whole thing, and every day the dailies were just bright. And they were brighter than normal. And I was talking to the Daily's colorist, and
Bright Star.
I was like, dude, it's too bright.
That's what I was thinking.
Like, no, they're fine. They're fine. They're totally fine. I'm like, okay. So I was altering my exposure every day. Just to
God.
kind of, you kind of manipulate it slightly. And then we did this dark scene, the bear talking and stuff. And, I went, well, based on the dailies that I've seen in the last few days, I'm going to underexpose probably a little bit more than I would ordinarily. And it ended up looking great, but what I found out was that the video that they were recording on, they had not terminated. I think there was some video termination issue, so that my dailies were coming back looking way bright, or whatever it was, the video component of the copy. And I was like, wow. So I was relying on the video
Yeah.
to get that exposure right, which again, I mean, we've talked about the film versus digital debate going, well, that would never happen on digital. Well, really, would it? If you've got the right monitor,
Right.
and your image is being sort of pumped through, so that you're making the right decisions. But yeah, it's the way we're watching dailies, I think, is important for color, but also as part of the process involved in, Donald, as you were saying, being able to chat to people, because everyone's watching them probably at home over dinner as they're, trying to prepare for the next day, and you might have questions, but you're not watching them with the DP. You know what I mean? Like there is a certain element of that which we have lost by not doing dailies as a group. I feel, and and it is something I think, as much as we can, try and push, particularly also in testing, because Donald, you and I have spoken about this a lot, where you just don't get the actors with enough time to do all your tests and put them on camera. I mean, it feels like sometimes there is instances, because everyone sees the image so immediately, that you don't need to go to the extensive level of testing that you may have needed in the past. Is that kind of how you all feel about that?
I think it's really got to the point now where I think the actors have to really step up. I mean, after, so much of it, but I think that there's a lot of people that are stepping into this that can also make it problematic for us, where you have to fight to test things. We've had to do it with people and say, I think it's time to get them in. It's availability. That it's the same 10 actors that seem to make all the films these days. They keep telling you there's a shortage of actors. That's so as you're getting ready to prep a film, they're usually promoting another film, and so you have to I was certainly breaking COVID rules and calling people directly, through all kinds of means to drag people in and saying, would you mind, could we do this? Could we get a fitting, do a test fitting, get a life cast, get a scan, all on my own time. There's no producers anymore that are helping you. It's very rare. It's actually quite a really rare find to get someone to get they want contact lenses, teeth, all these things. If you don't do it yourself, you won't get it done. You just won't. And so many people, colleagues of mine, they find themselves in problematic situations. And the actors, the pressure or their people will then put you in the firing line on day one, that they want to look like this, and then the actors are seeing dailies, which I've never experienced. So I think of people I knew who maybe only went to establish something. Never. And now everybody, practically the background and the crowd would be seeing dailies if they could.
It's too easy because they can do it at home. Before, it was at the end of a long day.
But also they have a lot
generally
of influence.
Invite only, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. Yeah.
You didn't get people in who they need to be invited to come into that session.
And they oftentimes didn't invite the actors because they felt it made them the director felt it made them self-conscious in the next scene.
We're feeling that, because then people are asking, changes are being made, and you're not always in a position of expertise, and you have to be very careful. You can get set up, and agents and managers and assistants. There's a new thing now that's happening. It's unbelievable, where we can't even take still photographs on sets and we can't get the unit stills person to photograph. Remember when they used to do that for us?
Yeah.
So we could actually have reference photos, not just for continuity.
How do you have reference then? Like when you're doing a bruise or something?
Well, sometime, if you're lucky, now people just sneak their own. If they're halfway decent photographers, whoever's the best one in the department does it. There's movies you can't take photographs.
You can't, really?
Wow, that's crazy.
You have to have the red, this red for people, so people can't take photographs. And then you've got the making of, and then the EPK. People have more access to photographs on a movie than we do. And the actor's assistant is taking an iPad photographs with this on nonstop. and you'll be getting someone ready, a star, and they'll be holding up the phone in the makeup chair. This goes way back, even to the Blade Runner years, where people are going like this, click, click, click. And we've done a makeup test that no one's supposed to know about. No one's got a script. And he or she, that actor, the pictures have gone to the agent, and people are asking, do I look up? Is that good? What
wow.
do you think?
Wow.
That's what's happening. And I think it's shocking, but they're shocking. I think back of people, Gene Hackman, or they never go to that. You pick themselves just into the team. They relied on the director and the cinematographer and the experts to say, what do you think? Now I've got people that go to the cinematographer to say, what about this? Can you do something here? It's a little bit, it's disheartening a little bit, because it's become so much of a fashion shoot, even when it's not supposed to.
So, Donald, do you feel like in the upshot, I guess, of there's so many images and the high quality of the video recording, and there's an upshot of that, which I guess means that you can watch quickly on set what you did 6 months ago in order to match. I mean, one of the things that I always feel really bad about when it comes to makeup is how you guys can track injuries or bruises or deterioration of a character. Does that then make it easier? Do you feel like you have access to what you need to be able to do that? Because you don't have a plate in them, do you? Like those photos that you've maybe stolen, and like how does that work? Like, do you feel more empowered in some ways? Because it feels like there's a real dichotomy where we've lost a lot in the film business and we've also gained a lot.
I think absolutely. I mean, I learned so much when we were doing Skyfall, and learning so much about working with people who do share information that you can go in and look in the DI, and working certainly with Greig to try things, on certain things, like on Austin, when there were certain spots here on the side where you might have an appliance that might just bleed over, that you could matte something with an anti-shine. That kind of thing is great, because if you had to wait for dailies that used to go back to, remember, it would go to LA and you'd wait a few days, then you might have. So I learned to love digital. I mean, I thought that was kind of great, but you had to be with the right people. That's what I discovered. If you were with the right cinematographer, the right team, now you've got sort of ADs that treat it like TV, because everyone's working in TV. So they sort of herd you, not certain films, but there's a lot of films where the culture of the AD team are from television. So everyone's brought in, you're sort of treated like, get everyone touched up. They don't even want you on the set to look at the lighting. That's commonplace now. You hear that, where they want to handle it like a television set. It's kind of merged. And then TV actors working in movies. But I agree. I think digital's been great, where you can see it and go, that won't work, and we've got to fix this. Or bloods and things that are too red or too brown. I mean, that's been so great to learn to make that work more efficiently. And I know on Blade Runner, when we did all that with Kay and all that pink, with Joy, I thought was sort of so interesting how beautiful it really was. Like every frame, how beautiful it could be, and sometimes by accident, sometimes intentional, on the big screen. That people can see if they're allowed access. But you have films where you're so not allowed that everyone's kept away. It's sort of like the Wizard of Oz. You can't come here, you can't go there, you can't talk to anybody. Don't look at there's a lot of that starting up again too, where there isn't. I mean, we've not been on those, but there are a lot of films like that where you don't have that access. People in separate trailers getting ready, security people, it changes one film to another, that it changes the dynamic. You have more security and assistance, personal chefs. I mean, there's more personal chefs and security on movies I've been on than there have been camera and makeup crew. Sorry, I said it. It's true.
So, I mean, getting back to color, Greg, do you think, because you seem to be the LED wizard, do you think that the prevalence now of new LED lighting, which does so much and is great, but is it introducing another issue with color because the color appears somewhat different depending on the light that you're using?
It's super interesting. I mean, I love the topic. I mean, this is where I'm loving listening to you guys and Donald, given all of your experience, because there's no resource out there about what lights do what. Because I feel like LED lights are kind of like the new film stock.
Yeah.
You used to know if you wanted a certain look for a movie, you would go towards a Fuji or a Kodak or a high contrast 500 or a low contrast. Like there'd be things that you would do to moderate the color that you're after. And with LED lighting, I think LED lighting is now the new film stock, which is an interesting one because the rental houses often, the lighting rental houses will often choose a path to go down when they buy their lights. And you are kind of forced into using the lights they have. And whereas there are so many lights out there now that multiple colors that I'm finding it hard to keep up. I'm finding it hard to keep up with what colors do to different skin tones, different complexions, different, even things like we're talking about with injuries, like with bruising, like there are different lights that do different things and excel in different areas. I mean, every colored light does broad-based color. You can all time them more red, more blue, more green. Like that's the easy part. For me, actually getting the skin to look as good as some of the most beautiful films that I've seen, I think for me, like some of my references for skin tones are all 1970s based films that have gone through the process from film to print. And, for me, that they have the most depth, they have the most complexity when it comes to skin tone. So I'm trying to find sort of the new lighting / camera combination that gives that to provide the most complicated skin tones. So, but I mean, this is where I look at. I mean, you just mentioned Blade Runner before, Donald. Like Blade Runner for me, color-wise, was one of the most beautiful films in the last 10 years, color-wise, because I think you got a real subtlety to the complexions in that movie. I mean, how did you go with that? That must have been a lot of testing and
a lot of conventional light sources, a lot of tungsten.
Really?
I was just thinking the LEDs I used on that. We were in the Anna's lab, the big white dome that was lit by this kind of a recessed light in the floor. I remember we had those bicolor strips, and we had two different. I think we were forced to get some cheap ones. So we had two different manufacturers. So some were kind of color-wise were pretty good, and some went skewed green. Because I remember in the DI selection the green on these stupid lights hitting the wall and trying to even them out, which was a nightmare. And I look at that scene now and I go, oh, that's horrible. But the scenes I think that work best where the skin tones and the characters look good. It might have been a very extreme kind of color of light, like in Wallace's office there with the big revolving a pattern of 300 betweenies, but they're all tungsten dimmed down, so you know exactly what that color temperature is.
Yeah. Have you found, because what I'm finding, one of the pushes that I'm making in every film that I do is to make sure that the lights we have, the LEDs that we have, are of a certain quality.
Oh, right.
And quality is a debatable thing as well, because if you get a scientist on here, a lighting scientist, they can point to high CRIs and high photospectromy malarkey, whatever the hell the scientists talk about. Like back in the day, remember on film there was the spectral sensitivity charts that you used to study on the back. Well, I did on the back of the Kodak. There was the spectral dye density curves, and
I always used to get them out pretending I knew what the hell they meant, but I never did.
Well, I studied photography, and we actually studied that for like a couple of years. So I actually kind of did understand for a little bit.
Yeah, well, I'm much older. I started in black and white, so didn't really need it.
Even though I understood in theory what it meant, I still didn't know what it translated to.
Yeah.
I didn't know how this little bit of red translated for a contrast. Anyway, but it's the same thing with lights. Like you've got all these lights and curves and all that stuff, but they all do such different things on skin. And so I personally, part of my mantra is I'm trying to test and test and test and test so that I can understand. Because the second, even when you change a film body, like if you go to a Sony rather than Alexa, everything goes out the window. All these lights become new. So, I mean, Rod, you were telling me that you were using some LEDs recently that I thought were really interesting.
Well, not that recently, because it was
is that right?
Empire of Light, I think, because we were again forced for cost reasons to bring in some panel lights that were a lot cheaper, and the rental company would give us a lot less money than what I really wanted. And you think, they're just simple. They're panel lights. They're just RGB. There's nothing fancy about them. But yeah, they did not look right.
Yeah.
But there were some that you really loved.
When I was doing, I remember when I was doing Rogue One. Rogue One was a really tough film to do because we had a lot of grey sets. Because I think the Empire, all the Death Star stuff was all grey sets. And so we had lights from the side, lights from above. And if they were different LEDs or even different manufactured years of LEDs, you could never get the color right. And if you're lighting a grey surface, it's like lighting a grey ball. It became impossible. Like we tried using a color temp meter. We tried using dialing it the same. We tried doing it to eye and then looking at it on the camera. It was just like literally chasing your tail, and it would never ever line up. It was one of those times where I love the color changeability of RGB LEDs, but when they change like that, you can't then get them looking the same. And if you don't have enough of them, if you're doing some sets that are large, like you probably you told me about on where you had to have different lights that don't match, and it's a nightmare in the DI. So I think I'm not necessarily a proponent for tungsten. I do like to try and be a little bit environmentally conscious and have that flexibility of not having to use gels.
Well, that's the thing.
There's a certain advantage.
That's the thing, though, you say with gels. The thing is tungsten lights, they're great if you're using them as tungsten light. But as soon as you put gels on them, what age are the gels? How hot's the lamp? You spot it in, the gel changes after half an hour. So are you changing the gels every half an hour to make sure your color's what you want? So there's a lot of issues, but at least with LEDs, as you say, you've got that control. You don't have to worry about gels, and it saves an enormous amount of time. So, I mean, the advantages outweigh the disadvantages. I think my advice was never paint a set grey, because it is a nightmare. I mean, but it was always a nightmare. I don't know if you were old enough to remember HMIs, Greg, but when HMI was old, touche, right? Okay, if an HMI was old, or it was from a different manufacturer, you had a couple of different manufacturers, and you were lighting a room with grey walls and daylight as well, you'd never get the grey consistent across the frame. It was just not possible.
Yeah, I do. Listen, I do remember those. I must say, one of my favorite HMI was the 1.2K par, because I could get it en masse and it was cheap.
Yeah.
And, I remember the rental houses were literally throwing them away. So I was them for like $25 a day.
Right.
So I love the 1.2K par.
Yeah.
Did you have a question, Donald?
The same issue.
Donald, did you have a question?
I was just curious about the LED. When did that really start becoming kind of a thing that we were just seeing more? Was that really with digital, or was it phasing into film?
I mean, LEDs come in slowly, but now they've come in on a pace, haven't they? Mind you, we were surprised the other day. We were in Chicago at DePaul University, and they had very few LEDs. They were still
behind the times.
Still, it was mainly tungsten sources, which was nice to see the sort of students kind of like learning about gels and colors and that way, rather than just controlling a sky panel or whatever, you know.
But it's an interesting question. Did digital make it come faster?
I mean, I recall some films that I've done, and I used the early sort of single color LEDs. I think Cream Source had a thing called the Doppio that I liked because it had punch, had power and punch, but it wasn't color changeable. But I remember the very, very first ones that came out were all a bit green and gelled them with a quarter CT magenta, quarter magenta, to get them correct. But I think it's been both cars have been on the highway at the same time. I think that's what's been happening, and this is the problem that I have with color is that they're both on the same on going in the same direction, but they're on different highways, and so you know, lighting manufacturers don't necessarily use LEDs as their sensor to calibrate their sensors, and the lighting companies don't use the sensors from the cameras to calibrate the cameras. They all use different photometrics, and so I think now this is where it's up to us as cinematographers to really test and find out what is the right light for our subject. And this is where, you know, as a makeup artist, Donald, like I don't know how you even I can't keep up. I don't know how you do it because I can't keep up with all these lights that are coming out. You know, I was at the BSC Expo looking at all these brand new fantastic lights and going, I didn't know this. I would like to believe that I'm fairly up to date with my knowledge about what's coming out. But again, you're at the sort of, as a makeup artist, you're at the pick and call of what I can get on my set or what Roger can get on his set, you know, budget-wise and availability-wise, depending on which country you're in as well. So
I feel like
it's a bit of a weird world.
I think that's why people have to really see the films. I mean, you know, they know I'm kind of a news junkie and a movie junkie. I see everything because I love to see what everybody's doing and what I do, what you do. I don't always know, and I'm not an expert, but I love to see, you know, they know that I love the Wim Wenders movie this year because the simplicity of how one person's shooting something and the acting and the cinematography and the makeup, everything, and then other things that are hugely complicated because sometimes you find out things if you can meet the people or ask them, how did you do this, or what was used, or, you know, a very complex film that had all the bells and whistles, and you kind of really wonder, did they really need all that? Or, I mean, there's a lot of what we do, it's just over the top. It's a lot, you know, and sometimes you have to do that. I just find this is why this is so important. As I mentioned to James yesterday, so many, you know, when we were talking, so many people rely on this type of, because it's not a Hollywood showbizy thing. There's so much of that in our business now that's about awards or showbiz and not about the disciplines and the craft of what you do that many people don't understand. You can't, you know, it's just watching a great movie and asking people like you, or when I think, Greg, we talked about that movie Foe that I saw and how it had some very interesting lighting and cinematography, like really interesting. But who do I know? Who knows about it? You. So I could email you.
But Donald, when you watch these films and talk about these films, do you deep dive into what they were shot on, the lights that were being used? Like how deep dive do you get into that? And I mean, because obviously that's not your wheelhouse.
Well, I wouldn't say I'm pretty OCD, but enough that I go to screenings. I mean, I try my best to go and see films, but I feel like I'm really like creator. I know you were involved with that, and then people told me how, and I'm a nerd in a different way, but I'll find out. Creator. I was very interested in the visual effects in it, of the little bit I know. But I think that's what's missing in our industry now. I mean, whenever I see Roger and James, we talk about, what did you see? What did I see? I think there's a lot of that missing, because now it's so much of we don't have that kind of proverbial, remember the water cooler. We don't even break for lunch anymore on films.
No time for that.
There's no time for that. So you can't even, what did you see this weekend? I mean, we're going to a movie. If you're not working or you go to see a film, we talked about, different things. No, I mean, that's why I can ask you or say, so, when did you use this? Or people asking me. Sometimes actors will ask me, when did you guys stop using this sort of thing? Occasionally, someone will come up with something because they've been watching Entertainment Tonight or Access Hollywood and will say, oh, will you use a transfer appliance on my face? And I'm like, really?
And that's what's so cool about this. Is why I asked you the question about if you deep dive into lights and technology, because I don't deep dive into the brand of foundation that was used on an actor in because I wouldn't have any concept of that.
Okay, so full disclosure, I believe I was trying to get to the bottom of something I think James had to correct me because I knew she would know. I wasn't sure what the set was called. I thought, what is this?
Oh.
I thought it was the Swiss Alps being projected. I had a kind of slight headache yesterday being called to the set for last looks on our main attraction. And it was, what is this? Brand new.
I had to tell him, I said, Donald, it's the volume. And for goodness sakes, get that right when you're talking to Greg.
Yes. Okay. So I would be the most embarrassed individual in the entire industry. Thank you, James.
I was just going to bring up the LED volume. You're talking about LED lights, but what about the volume then? I was reading an article the other day in American Cinematographer that was implying that maybe the backgrounds that are played back on the volume should be shot on film because the final image would look more realistic if the backgrounds were shot on film, which seemed very odd to me. But anyway.
I don't know about that theory because I don't think the problem is the way they were captured.
No.
And also, that the backgrounds for some sets are in 3D, so they've been photographed with a stills camera or
right.
a scan. So they're not even captured. They're just created it.
Yeah, right.
Then there's a whole other conversation about AI, which is about to start being able to create backgrounds.
Right, so but simply in the terms of light and how it affects an actor's or actress's face, talk about the volume on Batman, right? So how did you feel about the color fidelity on that, the way that the background, because you were using the volume to light the foreground, right?
Yeah, but I mean, and we also used it on Mandalorian, which is where kind of the whole concept started getting some traction. But what I found, and this is absolutely relevant to this discussion, is because those panels are designed to be sitting above a building on Sunset Strip advertising movies. Like they are designed to be outside or a concert, a U2 concert, or like they're designed to be display panels or a shopping center. They are definitely not designed to be photographing actors or humans.
So it's all your fault.
It's all my fault. But what's happening is there are the companies like Brompton and Sony are hearing this and they're creating better color.
Right.
So it's an evolution, and unfortunately, those panels didn't exist for film. We had to take them from the top from display. But yes, I found that when the image that you were putting up on the screen was a little bit different color-wise, so sunrises, sunsets, dawns, dusks, nights, which have an intrinsic difference to them, because there's a slight warmth, or there is that little bit of magenta. Like you can kind of argue that the color is not quite right, but in a lovely way.
Yeah.
I feel like they worked better.
Yeah.
Whenever we were using, and this is more so in The Mandalorian, because Mandalorian obviously had hundreds of sets we had to do, not just one, which was on The Batman, but we had to do scenes that were more daytime on The Mandalorian. And when you tried to then replicate daylight on the volume, that's when it all falls apart. And yes, you can grade and you can grade things, but again, it just looks cheap. You've got a digital acquisition format. You've got a light that doesn't work as well as it should. And you're trying to sort of fix that with makeup and trying to fix it with adding light from a different source. It was a nightmare. That was a nightmare. And so, I think it's a really good talking point, because
but they look great in Piccadilly Circus. The adverts in Piccadilly Circus look great.
Make them, well, when they're creating odd colors, they're fantastic.
Right.
But when you're trying to create natural colors, that's when it starts to fall apart.
Right.
So, I'm fine. I'm struggling. I struggle particularly if you get a light source that's not great, or a light that's old, or like I said before, like it's a cheap RGB LED and it just doesn't do the right skin tone.
Right.
And so I personally feel a responsibility when I'm on set and I have to talk to someone like Donald and say, hey, why does my actor look not so great, Greg? I'm like, well,
yeah, right.
It's all my fault.
No pointing fingers here.
The only light that I could get.
But there is also something strange, I think, about using the volume in the circumstances. As you say, what you did in Batman, where it's a sunset, or the color's not quite anything you can sort of put your finger on. It's not so it can be slightly skewed one way or the other. But when you're trying to capture something that's a neutral color, that's really problematic. But I kind of think of, we were working in animation, and animation, they stretch going further and further to try and light their animated films, not cartoons, I was going to say, in a naturalistic way. So these guys went out and kind of captured the light in a forest, right? And they put it on this scene that they had set in a forest. And the characters look goddamn awful. Because there isn't there a sort of like a point where you take the natural source, or you take naturalism, but then you mold it to sort
whatever you're doing,
the script, the story, the shot, and that's called lighting. Isn't that what cinematographer does?
Exactly. Yeah, it's a we're in a very weird point now, but I'm hopefully people can listen back to this in 50 years and go, oh, what a ugly blip that in history, lighting wise, this was, where we're just now starting to come out of the hole. I feel like the quality of lights that are existing right now, we're just starting to kind of en masse create the right type of tools for cinematographers that are either Fresnels, or they're punchy, or they've got focusability or cutability. Like up until sort of now, I've had some very good fortune and good luck where I've pushed for the lights that I've liked, and I've managed to get them for the most part, and that's through stubbornness, frankly. Like, it's through me becoming a little bit of a throwing a hissy fit when I don't have access to the right lights. And I think it's not because I like to see a light on set that is my brand. It's just because what comes out of it.
Yeah, of course. It's a tool.
You said, like, trying to fix something that doesn't look right is hell.
Yeah.
It's pure hell. And that's why I think it's worth doing that testing, which is what I'm about to do myself for a film, where I'm doing it on skin tone, and I'm trying to get the right skin tone for the right cameras, and then making the choices about the lights as a result of that, as opposed to saying, well, these are the lights you got, go ahead and use them.
But when you're doing those kind of tests to figure out the right skin tone, do you have to have, because you have different actors with different skin tones. So do you obviously probably can't get the actors that early on. Do you then try and have stand-ins that match? Or are you trying to replicate as much as possible? Because what might do it on you, on me, could make it look completely different.
I would
I
recommend.
think so.
Sorry, I would just came to my mind before Empire and what we did for tests. I get a grey wall, your grey wall, Greg.
Your favorite one.
But I put a little tungsten light on part of the wall, and then any LED you're going to use, put it on the other part of the wall. And it's a great test.
Yeah.
And then you put an HMI there instead of the tungsten, and see if the LED will replicate daylight as well as an HMI, which is not perfect, but it's a pretty good test.
To that point, I think it's a very clever one, and I do recall on Star Wars we did have the grey ball, the VFX grey ball, and that was an interesting way to try and match them. I think we might have even used the grey ball exactly so that you could wrap them, and it would just look like it was one light. But I think that's a very good test for that. I mean, the whole skin tone thing is an interesting discussion because, the actor might even come on set with different tone to what you might have worked with him or her last time.
Yeah.
They might be going for something a bit more shaded or a bit darker, or with the makeup department, he or she may have changed their tone. So all you can do really is your best attempt at hoping that this person is this tone, or this shade, or this light, or this dark, or this. I remember when I did Rogue One, actually. Rogue One was an interesting film process because when I tested, I was on Rogue One for quite a bit of prep because the film pushed a few times. And I was very fortunate in that I had to fill the days a little bit with testing, because we were at the early days. I think the rental house was going to go and buy some LEDs, some RGB LEDs. So I was pretty much testing, non-stop for like a week or two. And I found it was a massive difference between one light and another. Like one light particularly would be really good for the reds in the skin tone, in which case what it meant was that Caucasian skin looked more natural. And we had a couple of Asian skin tone actors in that film, and I found that there were some lights that really made their skin tone look very pallid. And there were some other ones that made their skin tone look sort of more natural. So it was a really interesting test to learn about what these LEDs were doing, even though the photometrics were all the same.
Right.
That actually some skin would react better to some lights than other lights. So it would almost be a case where you'd almost have a key light for a different actor depending on what their skin tone is. So I don't know if that's still the case.
But if they're both in the same scene, what do you do?
You call in sick that day.
Yeah, I would.
I have a question about this because it's very interesting. I was thinking back. Well, this is may I ask a two-part question? Years ago, you and Roger know, I love that film with John Hurt, 1984. The look of, just forget the film was great, but the look of everybody and the tone of it, I don't know what it was it sepia, but the look of it has always stayed with me. And I think, there's other films Children of Men and other films with that feel, but there was something in the tone of people's skin, the overall, the whole vibe of it. And I haven't seen many films that have been able to pull that off. And maybe you also had, obviously, the right light, the right production design, everything about it, the costumes, the makeup. It's very hard. And when you have a cast that are very representational and diverse, it's very hard now. Not that it's hard, it's challenging, because if you get a cast where you've got some people, let's say you've got to have people who prefer a very matte finish for different reasons. you might be working with a director right now who likes people to just not have a. I like it very. I know Greg likes it. Roger, we've done things where people have very translucent finish. We use sweat. We use some kind of shine. Right now, I'm working with somebody for what we're doing in Tron is not. It's in the program, in the grid. It's matte, and it makes sense, but it doesn't work necessarily for people of color. It never has, and so people of color are particularly sensitive to it. And I learned this, I'm just, long story short, 30 years ago on a Guillermo del Toro movie with a wonderful actor who always said, but everyone knows people of color, especially black actors, matte is a sign of not being well. And so if you want to do that, and we still function that way. It's beautiful. This is the celebration of people of color. And when you do the great beauty, a blonde, fair beauty, it's going to be a more matte finish because that's the typical presentation. So it's very difficult for us sometimes when you have an ensemble cast where 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I guess that's just a question of the balance maybe of, we've done that, Greg, where we had people like Dr. Keane, somebody, but a lot of daylight, exterior, fine. But then in studio, it can get a little bit trickier for us, and I'm sure for you, where somebody's saying, I'm not having powder, matte finish, because now we are in a new world. It's about representation. This is how I look. I don't have powder. I don't have a matte finish, and that's what I do. And so skin tone is celebrated, and it's just a thing. So I just thought, if that's something we could talk about a little bit.
I remember hearing a while back about this. Actually, was discussing this with an African American actor who made the point that all of the film stock, everything is calibrated to Caucasian skin tone. You know, everything that occurs in the film business up to that point had kind of occurred because towards Caucasian skin tone, which then means you're kind of like you said, Donald, you're sort of trying to kind of navigate your way through the process, making sure that every skin tone in the image is represented the best way possible.
I don't think film was calibrated that way. I mean, film was calibrated to a spectral chart, a color chart. I mean, you always tested your film stock and your lighting against the color chart with, an array of multiple colors. I don't think it was selective like that. Obviously, film stock has certain biases, but they're not racial biases. I mean, they're just sort of natural sort of color discrepancies in emulsions. But
I think a lot of it too is the knowledge of makeup people, because for a long time it was basically white faces that they were making up. And because I remember when I was coming up, I had a really dear friend who was a makeup person, and she was married to an African American, and so she understood black skin, and she was hired for all of that because she told me, she said that's just a different way of making up the actor. So possibly it's not so much the film is skewed that way, but
biases,
the knowledge of makeup. Might have been.
I'm sure that's absolutely true. Yeah.
Well, yeah, but also casts have changed.
Yes, right. Casts have changed.
I was doing a spot with a African American lady, and I had some fill light that was a slight blue tone to it. Like I had an LED on the camera that was a little bit blue, and she said to me she didn't think that made her look the healthiest, Donald, to that point, that blue in the shadows made her look the healthiest. And I was like, fair point, there you go, thank you very much. Like that's something that I had to learn as a cinematographer, because
it's interesting that she knew that too, that she could dissect the light. Yeah, the light. Yeah. There's so many elements to getting the color right, unfortunately.
Yeah, Yeah, I think that's it's a very interesting world we're in now. It's a very interesting world. Like this, I'm testing about 20 or 30 lights next week. All brand new lights that have literally appeared in the last year. So I'm really quite scared and excited about the fact that I've got to get through all these lights. But this is the problem that I have. I don't have any resource to learn from about this either. It doesn't exist.
And how do you do these tests? I mean, physically, how do you do it?
Well, I mean, I definitely shoot a face in a color chart, and I definitely try and blind test them because I have biases when it comes to the light sources that I use. And of course, we all must have inbuilt biases because we're humans. So because of those biases, I always try and do blind tests where, I make sure that we do numbers and the dimmer board ops talking to my second AC, that they're taking notes of everything, but I'm not aware of what the colors are. And then I try and get the same source through, say, a diffusion, say like a light diffusion. And then you got to account for the fact that some lights are already diffused and some are not, so that you don't want to be reacting to the differences in softness. You want to react just to the color. So I'll always try and do, let's say I did 10 lights in a row, I'd try and make sure the quality was the same on all of them. So either added diffusion or take diffusion away. And that when you just go through, you just go like 1 through 10 and just switch. And then see which ones you respond to the best, just from a purely aesthetic level. Like just not even technically which has got the best tone of red. It's like, which do you feel looks the best for that skin tone and for that character? And then you deep dive into that. You sort of try and whittle it down. So you start from a wider selection and you try and get rid of lights that maybe you don't like. And then the ones that you do, you then whittle those down. But it's also not just skin tone too. Like there are things like dimming capabilities. Which ones dim down and don't turn off at 5%.
Yeah,
don't go green when you dim down.
And which ones have a flat, wide beam of light rather than the sort of hot spot in the middle and all the rest of it. Yeah.
So trying to determine effectively what the highlights are or what the benefits of some lights are versus the low lights of some lights. Because you might find that some lights are fantastic at 100%, but then when you dim them down, like one of my favorite lights, which is, it's now an older light back from, 2015, it doesn't dim very well. I don't find it dims very well. So the problem is if you go to 30%, your color is a little bit out. So you then have to have enough pixels that you can turn lamps off as opposed to dim them down, which is a little bit archaic when, the dimming curve doesn't work so well. So if you can find lights that dim well, then you can work at, say, 5%, or you're not adding, nets to the front of LEDs because you want to be working at the 50% range. So I would effectively do that with my testing. I would just do that and then I would be able to show that to the makeup department as well. So any of the tests that we do, I'd be able to sort of show to the makeup department just to see what their thoughts were in regards to, color, the color of the foundation, color of, any of the appliances, that are always the giveaway when you've got a piece of latex next to a piece of skin, and the color of those two are out. And does the LED make the problem better or the problem worse? And that's the big test when you've got appliances.
But then how much... I was just thinking, you talk about selecting different light. I was just thinking when we were on Skyfall, we did the MI6 basement sort of bunker, and we lit it all with fluorescent tubes straight out of a hardware store because they were cheap, and we dimmed them. Now you can dim fluorescent tubes. I was surprised, but you can dim them down to about 60 or 50% even without them falling apart and flickering. And so we did the whole space with them. The color was really off. But again, we were shooting on the Alexa, and I wasn't really mixing those light sources with much else. It was all lit by these fluorescents. There might have been one or two sort of practical lights on a desk or something, but I didn't really worry about that. But just because I can't remember, it was hundreds of bulbs, hundreds. It was the only cost-effective way of doing it. So, I mean, why? I saw it as a real compromise. I mean, there were, I think, at the time, LED probably alternatives, or there were Kino flows, but they were so much more expensive. So, sometimes you're boxing a corner, aren't you, about the realities of it, and you make it work. And yeah, somebody could have come and watched maybe the dailies of that and said the color was a bit off, but I think it looked all right in the final thing, But
isn't that's the other part of the argument about the whole CRI thing? Because I guarantee you those fluorescents technically were terrible when it comes to all the scientific readouts. But I love using fluorescent tubes. Like I think that scene looks amazing, and I think it looks amazing because it's been shot beautifully. But beyond that, I think the color's great because probably what that fluorescent light does to the skin with the Alexa, I think it's really interesting. We did the same on Batman. We actually debated. We actually thought about going into Chinatown and
offering to replace their tubes in the old restaurants, so we could get really old yellowy tubes.
Yeah.
That look so good. Because I think you can't really match that quality.
Hard, yeah.
It's very hard to match that quality.
Yeah.
But I guess that's that's where the whole technical business of the best LEDs and the highest color isn't necessarily true. Because I had the same. I did a film where I could change out the fluorescents for Kino tubes, and I did, and I changed them to daylight balanced Kino tubes, and I to this day will tell you that's one of my least favorite scenes
I've ever
shot. And it's because I think it's partially because of the color. I just didn't love the color. I mean, Kino make fantastic products, but in that sense, it wasn't appropriate for that scene. I should have kept the cheap fluorescent tubes.
Right. Donald, do you remember in Sicario with that, where was it? When they're interrogating the Mexican drug baron in that yellow room. It's only yellow because the fluorescents were yellow. They were existing. So we nicked some from a room next door and put up these same horrible yellow fluorescents in the very old, the distressed kind of the soft boxes they were in. It was like really great. But Chris, for a while, the gaffer would say, well, we should change them all out. And we go, well, Chris, should we really? And he went, oh, I see what you mean. But again, with the Alexa, I'm not sure on film whether I'd have made the same choice.
Was it a shock for you, Donald, when you brought the actor on set and everything was yellow?
No, you know what? It was it's a great scene, the impact of the scene, because you felt the creepiness, everything about it, the danger. He was in trouble. You knew he was getting the slap down. It's a great example of everything working right, the lighting, the kind of seediness of the place, because that's where people got tortured. You knew people were getting tortured in there, right?
Yeah.
Because he walks in and you just saw what was happening, and we did that little bit of beat up makeup. He's in there, and the yellow, it really was. I remember, it's funny now that you say it, quite vividly. And most films like that, you would not remember a scene quite like that, but I remember, and the color and the room. So that left a lasting impact, didn't it?
Yeah. That's one of my favorite scenes in Sicario. It's one of my favorite scenes non-stop because of the pure simplicity, but it's so raw. And I think had you fixed it up in inverted commas,
but what
it would have been wrong.
Does to people and to the faces, it's always those scenes. If
you were shooting that on film, though, do you think you would have done lighting tests on that? Would you have gone into that location and shot some tests and then tried it with some magenta gel? Like, what would you have done differently?
I'd probably just taken tests. I mean, I was still using my Leica digital before I started shooting digital on film. So I used that quite often for references. So on the location scout, I'd have probably seen that yellow and maybe I'd have left it yellow. Probably would have done, yeah.
So, Greg, when you're doing all this testing before a movie for whatever new lights are out there, are you looking for lights that sort of are part of the package, but also lights that are for specific scenes?
Yeah.
It's a big discussion about what's available en masse as well, because
Yes.
there are all these new lights. It's all fantastic to have a great new light, but if you've only got two of them,
Yeah, right.
a massive environment. But then suddenly you might have two of all these brand new lights, and then you've got that same problem we talked about where everything's different. And so it's a bit of a balance, because I feel like there's some amazing manufacturers out there right now doing some incredibly innovative work with their color science, with their fixtures, with their color draw, with their power draw, and a lot of them aren't represented really well at the rental houses. They're not represented as well as perhaps they should be, because again, we're in this brave new world. Rental houses don't want to go and buy 1,000 of a fixture that next year you guys come in and the 1,000 fixtures that I want them to buy, you test and you hate, because there's no standard of what's correct, or maybe your requirements are different with your actors. And so I think rental houses quite rightly are being very conservative about what they buy en masse, because it's evolving so quickly. So what I'm trying to do is trying to find, what can we get en masse if we need it? If we have some scenes where there maybe a small room can be small, we could use 5 of those lights, not 500, and they can afford to be different, or the source coming from below is different, or and also how gradable the lighting is, because one success I've had is, I've really enjoyed doing this, is actually getting my dailies colorist to start futzing with the color, so he can affect all the skylight, for example, and he can also affect so it's like 4-dimensional lighting, where it's not just grading in the final, you're grading the lights to get the most out of it. And we did a little bit on Batman like that. We shot an exterior at the beginning of the film where the Riddler's watching, and we shot the exterior at 2 Temple in London at dusk. And then we shot on stage a few months later, and I had my colorist come in and match the exterior color that we'd already shot to the lights that were in the grid. And I found that to be really fun and successful. We got the color looking so perfect on the day that then when we graded it, it just
went together.
So that's part of the other test that I want to look at, about how well can we grade the light on the day so that it becomes as fulsome and multi-dimensional as possible.
So how was he matching it? Because I don't see why you couldn't just do it if you had something calibrated and to match the light. How was he? Did he have the CDL from the original and then? No. Well, no, because we had the dailies of what the grade was from the 2 Temple exterior shoot, and then he would grade the lighting to match the same color, temperature, and the same color as because it was a sunset shot, it was a dusk shot. What was he? Was he on the lights, or was he grading? What was he changing?
He was grading on the dimmer.
On the dimmer board. Okay.
So the RG and the B, he was affecting the same way that he would affect that in the daily suite. He was affecting it on the desk. So the color then of the lights then matched the dailies color from the exterior.
Interesting.
I think it's interesting.
And it was good because I tried it. I tried it and I couldn't do it because that's not my thing, right? So he came in and instantly, that's what he does every day. So he just affected it. It took him 2 minutes and everything matched.
It's interesting that there used to be only like 2 or 3 major manufacturers of film lighting, right? You know, and most people took Mole Richardson probably as the standard for film lighting, and then Arri, sure, and Ian Arrow. But you think now it's interesting, isn't it? There's so many different manufacturers of LED lights, and I suppose because the amount of work going through television, it makes it profitable for them to spend fortunes actually experimenting on different kinds of lights. It is kind of incredible.
It's quite good because it also makes the same lights that we can use en masse available to people who are doing sort of either smaller independent pictures,
Yeah.
or even sort of single shooter kind of run and gun type things. They've got the same access to that same quality.
Right.
So I think it's a very interesting time.
Yeah. But it is.
The danger is the skin tone. If you're not doing the right thing by skin tone.
It's all part of the digital revolution that was supposed to be making it all so much more simple. And yet you kind of get nostalgic for film where it was just like, okay, that's it. It's on the emulsion. You got 1 or 2 manufacturers of lights and that's it. You got 2 film stocks. Well, maybe you had 3, but originally you only had 1 when I started, Greg, but you wouldn't remember that.
Really? I just remember 2.
I remember 1, 50 ASA. No, nearly. It was 100 time I started, but anyway.
Wow. Yes, life's so much easier, isn't it? When you got 12,800 ASA. We shot the creator at 12,800 ASA.
Wow. 0.
Wow.
I mean,
good title for that then, creator.
I mean, that level of control that we had at 12,800, I mean, that's where you start to have problems with lights that you can't turn off.
Yeah, right. No, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, you need to then create shape on people's faces.
Yeah, soon you'll be getting too much light from Beetlejuice or Alpha Centauri. You'll have to kind of flag off the starlight or something stupid.
I think we're at that point now.
Yeah.
I did do a film once where there was a night shoot and the director said, well, we're going to schedule it for a full moon. I said, well, good luck to you, mate. But now you could do that, couldn't you? You know, but if it was cloudy, you'd still have a problem. But anyway.
I think you could. I remember when I did Zero Dark 30, that was the first time Catherine had tested the Alexa, and everyone was saying, well, the Alexa can see in the dark.
Yeah.
Like, you know,
that always makes me laugh.
I was like, I'm not sure it can, even if we did shoot at 3200 ASA. So we went out to, I think, the darkest part of Palmdale out north Los Angeles. There's an old movie ranch out there, just because there was no light. And we did the test. We did the 16 mil, we did the 35 mil, you know, and then we did the Alexa. And yeah, sure enough, the Alexa could not see in the dark. So we proved to everybody that we had to actually put up a light to see something.
Yeah.
But I think now with some of these new generation cameras, if you can get up to 25,000 ASA or even 50,000 ASA, I think that you will definitely start seeing in the dark.
Oh, yeah.
If you want to, yeah.
Well, we'll be back to Sicario when we're shooting infrared. And the camera could see, but the actors didn't. They only had props or, night goggles on. So we had to put a light on for the actors, not to light the shot, just so they could see.
Yeah.
So they wouldn't trip over.
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
Oh, dear.
Well, I think that's pretty good.
It's pretty good. There's a few anecdotes in there. Funny.
Did we miss anything?
I got to say, I think I told you, I love Sicario. I think I told you all separately. I think Sicario is incredible.
Yeah, it's good.
Donald, I was explaining to Roger and James that when we're doing June, we were in Jordan. I was watching Sicario every day, every night. Like that was my wind down film, because despite the fact that it was not really a wind down film, right? But it was so perfectly realized. There was nothing in the movie. I can't watch stuff when I'm shooting, because I watch it, I'm like, oh, there should have been a bit more like, oh, that lens is too low. The light is all right. That film is like tonally perfect. that I can't.
Very special film,
can't.
isn't it? Very.
I like watching really bad
I do
movies.
too.
When we're on
Yeah.
a movie, we watch really
Right.
bad movies, and then you don't feel so bad about your own
Yeah,
work.
then you think, well, this one's not as bad as that. Yeah, I'm a big believer of that.
Yeah, right. Give me the worst movie
I'm
you
a
can.
I fear though that if I start watching a bad movie, the next day I'm gonna be my
Copy.
standards have dropped. Like everything is now judged based on what I just watched.
Yeah, right. This is good enough because it's better than the last movie.
Oh dear, that's maybe our problem.
Yeah, we should really rethink this.
I don't think you've suffered from that problem, guys. I think you've done all right.
Oh dear.
Well, thank you guys.
Nice.
This was
It's been
really
very nice
interesting.
talking to you
Pleasure.
guys.
Yeah.
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 Such a pleasure.
Oh dear.
Always,
I have
Yeah.
a
always
question.
fun to do.
Yes.
I know, okay, you both Roger and Greg take photographs. You love to take photographs, and you're both very good at it. Does that ever, so I'm just curious, because in the world of, stills, photographers on sets have also evolved. They're very different from when I started, that they had a very different function. Now they function to me as a kind of, I don't even know what they are anymore. It's not what it was when I started. They answered to the studio, to advertising, but that you both take, I mean, and Greg, you do, I notice quite often before a huge setup that you've lit and you take, and it's fascinating to me. And Roger takes pictures. Is it helpful, I mean, as a point of reference, if you've got, I'm just curious because I wished I had learned to take pictures or to sort of study something, because I do know that looking back at things and I kind of look at something and go, oh, I wish I'd maybe fix that, or people who do take stills can look at the work in a different, I know we're not working in stills and it's a different medium in another way, but sometimes when you look back and you see those great portraits of actors, occasionally they do those years later, or you look at something, like I've seen things where we aged someone on a film 20 years ago, and now I've seen them and go, we did pretty well because they sort of look like that now. But I'm just curious how that helps you sort of vis-a-vis like faces and how you lit them, if that helps you.
Well, it's two different kinds of photographs because Roger doesn't take photographs on set.
Only just as reference.
Yeah, as reference. But is there anything in that would Greg, for you is?
I mean, one thing that I do use stills for is I do use stills to study an actor when they first come onto a hair and makeup test. So the good thing about stills is that I can just flick through them. I've got a pretty high tolerance for flicking through images, and I can kind of sort of study them by doing different lighting scenarios. Like often what I'll try and do on a hair and makeup test is shoot 7 or 8 different lighting environments, soft, flat, side, backlit, silhouetted, like just try and barrel through as many lighting situations as possible. And then just shoot many different angles, almost like a lineup, like a police lineup. Not necessarily for emotion or for anything, but so I can study what their face does.
Right.
When I do certain things, because it's one thing watching a film that somebody's been in, but it's another thing to go. Well, they're in our movie now, and they feel different. So I used to do that on films because I did photography as reference for my exposure. Back in the day, and still would if I was doing a film. But I find that really useful. I find that really, really useful.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's really good. Sometimes you get some nice shots that you can then share with your other HODs to, for the director to put up on their wall, or to nothing for publishing, nothing for
even
to show.
Like inspiration. I mean, I know Roger's photographs, it's a different thing, but I was thinking in Sicario, those reflections and we see them so often in your films. And I mentioned that maybe to James once in Sicario, that wonderful, the plane reflected, that wonderful shot. And if just looking back on things that you've done, a reference shot of little things you find an inspiration from. I'm just fascinated, just on another level.
I mean, it's all about observing, isn't it? I think, Donald, you know, it's just about observing things. Yeah.
Do you so with the reference shots that you do on set then, Roger? What are they for? Are they for your personal collection, or are they for you to study? What are they for?
Well, on set, they're
just work.
I mean, they're just reassuring me I've got my exposure right, I think. No reference for location pictures really and stuff like that. Nothing more than that. And I just throw them away afterwards. You know, I just wipe them off. I used to use a Polaroid land camera. That was my favorite, a black and white Polaroid camera. That was my greatest reference really when I was when I was shooting film. But when I was shooting film really, I suppose.
So they were references for your film shots.
Yeah. I had black and white, and I found it was perfect.
Like a lot of people that would love to see that.
It was perfect. Perfect reference to the contrast within the shot, shooting black and white. You know, it's kind of nice images, I think. Yeah.
I'd like to see those. I wonder how we can see those.
It would be hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, good.
Alrighty.
Well,
Nice, guys.
thank you for doing this. This has been really interesting, actually.
Yeah.
I don't think we've solved it all.
No, I just found how complicated it all is.
Yeah.
No. It's really interesting though, isn't it? Because I've been scouring the online for tidbits of information about any lights that I'm going to test this week. Like I've been watching, YouTubers in Melbourne, Australia, who tested in the garage. Like literally, that's how much I'm sucking up this information to try and learn about these lights. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe this is good reference for people who feel like they don't quite understand what's going on in the world right now with lighting, and realize that actually it's not just them.
They're not alone. Yeah.
We'd love to hear.
You're not alone.
We'd love to hear what you come up with afterwards. And what you see off record.
Could be a part two.
Yeah, well, that's where I'd like to learn more, so that I could talk with some level of kind of expertise about what is good and where, and what lights are working and what lights aren't. Obviously, this is not the place to be necessarily bad mouthing certain manufacturers. But the other side of the coin, I mean, going back to all these manufacturers that exist right now, I mean, it's amazing that they do exist, because it means the level of innovation is growing at an exponential rate. Yeah. And the output and the power draw and the color quality is going off the charts. And it just hopefully allows all of us as filmmakers to have all these new options. Sometimes too many options. Like if you've got 30 different choices, sometimes that can be too much. But at least then, if we've got a specialty scene that we're doing, or something that needs to look a bit more like that Sicario scene, which is a bit more kind of rough and raw, but you have to do it with a film light, then there might be a film light that maybe specializes more in that kind of, in that world.
True.
Well, I enjoyed it at DePaul University the other day because we were lighting with Mo Richardson Fresnels, and it was a lot of fun.
Going
I
back
think
in
it's so
time.
cool that they're doing that, though. It's so cool that they're actually
It is, yeah,
kind of keeping
that's
that
great,
keeping
yeah.
that alive. Because the flip side of the coin is that if you've got all these new wave DPs requesting LEDs, that the old tungstens disappear.
Yeah.
In which case,
Wow, that would be
that's
sad.
never a
Yeah.
good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They had a couple of LEDs, so I won't mention the manufacturers,
Yeah.
but I didn't like them. No, some LEDs I love, actually. So. Anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Nice, guys.
Well, thanks a
All
lot.
right. Nice
This has
talking
been
to you
great.
guys.
Thank you all.
Oh,
Have a
this has
great,
been great.
have a
Thanks
great
for having
Sunday.
me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right, Donald.
That's
See
good.
you, Donald.